So I was saying the photographic archives I'm working on are mainly held in the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in Cambridge in the UK and at the Library of Congress in Washington, DC. So this rich material represents a unique testimony of separate cultures during an important period of decolonization of the region. The photos were made by Gregory Bateson. His work is of importance as he was one of the first anthropologists to study the Iatmul region in depth. While later anthropologists have returned and re-evaluated his anthropological work with their own observations made in the region, the photographic archives remain largely ignored. So I have mainly conducted archival research on Gregory Bateson, Rhea Fulton and Margaret Meads, but for this talk I'm mainly going to focus on Gregory Bateson. So for those who don't know them, there were particularly important figures in the history of anthropology for their theories, but also for their personal relationships in the form of a love triangle, which I think most of you have heard, which both their theory and this relationship was really important for their research and the history of the discipline. So Bateson was raised, so that's the three of them when they returned from the Sepik region in 1933, so that's them arriving in Sydney. So Bateson was raised in an academic family. His father, William Bateson, was a major figure of Cambridge University. He was a professor of biology and also mainly worked on genetics, linking genetics and heredity. Bateson was first trained in biology and zoology. He visited the Galapagos in 1925 and was...
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt. Who's Gregory in the photograph?
Oh, sorry. So Gregory he's the one on the left.
On the left.
Yes, so that's Gregory Bateson, Margaret Mead and Rhea Fulton on the right. So he visited the Galapagos in 1925 following Darwin's path, but was left dissatisfied by the discipline and decided to shift to anthropology after meeting Alfred Court-Harden, a key figure of anthropology in Cambridge. And that's after his encounter, he decided to do himself fieldwork and go to New Guinea. So I've put here the two maps. So on the left, that's the map of New Britain, so that's the northern part of the island. Here you've got rubble, and so in the middle here, the peninsula, you've got Gowlim, the village in which Bateson stayed. And then on the right, that's the map of the East Sepik province. So in black, you've got the Sepik River with the different villages in which Bateson stayed. So my interest in this specific material is based on the potential for photography to shed new light on Indigenous agencies recovering the historical and relational context of those photographic encounters. The project aims at re-evaluating photographic collection as traces of social encounters by attending the processes and contexts through which the photos were created and providing new perspective on the photographic archives. So at the center of the project, there's this notion of agency, for which I'm mainly using the definition of Brownwin-Douglas of agency as a general human potential to choose and act strategically, historicized within the limits of and possibilities of unstable constellation of cultures, structures, personality and circumstances. So in the context of ethnographic photography, Indigenous agency can be recovered through the creation, perpetration, or avoidance of social interactions with outsiders in their camera. Visual analysis provides clue for this approach through the close attention to materiality, provenance, and elements represented in or absent from the images. So archival images are therefore the result of particular relationships between anthropologists and the people they studied. So for this talk, I'm gonna take you through a kind of visual journey of Bateson's fieldwork, both in the Beining region and in the Iatmul region. So we'll start with this photograph made by Bateson in Latromat, also called Kainagunan, in the Beining region in New Britain in 1927. So Bateson stayed in this village between April 1927 and March 1928 as his first site for fieldwork research. So for this photo, we've got two descriptions, both given by Bateson. First, there's the first in the museum catalogue. Bateson wrote, so the ethnographer's house in Kainagunan. The structure of this house was planned without the help of the ethnographer, and it shows certain features due to culture contacts. The walls made of slats of palm, a raised floor, and then a second comment was made on the same photograph in a print sent to his godmother, Nora Barlow. So Nora Barlow papers are in the Cambridge University Library. And so at the back of this print, he wrote, "My own house, Kainagunan, Anum, my cook boy wearing dishcloths, and also water bamboos to right of the door, also raised floor." So it's first interesting to note the difference in tone between the two captions, because one was really sent to a relative and was way more personal. This photo documents a moment of daily life in Bateson's ethnography among the Beining group. The focus of the photograph was to show the house and condition of Bateson's work in the village. The photo, nevertheless, gives us other important details which go beyond Bateson's agency. The photo depicts three young men, most probably all three were working for Bateson as houseboys. The only one identified is Anum on the right of the house door. So this is Anum. The emphasis on Anum is not anecdotal. Anum was of particular importance in Bateson's work. Thanks to field notes and archives, it's possible to understand how Anum was the main assistant of Bateson in his ethnographic research, assisting him during interviews, translating myth and songs, helping him in the transcriptions of these songs and myth. And Anum himself was also a key informant. The other element which I would like to discuss is the architecture itself. Bateson notes that the house was made for him without his help, and shows features due to culture contacts. So following work and analysis of architecture as materialization of social relations, I'm arguing that this element is particularly striking and makes sense in a broader picture of Bateson's presence in the Beining region. The architecture of this house can therefore be analysed as the materialization of the way in which Bateson was perceived and considered locally. The house was made without his help in a way that was following the colonial government regulation. this association of Bateson with the colonial government seemed to be clear for the people in Kainagunan. The rationale of Bateson's presence in the region was linked to the colonial government. Bateson's decision to study the Baning group was in fact heavily influenced by Ernest Chinnery, the government anthropologist of the territory of New Guinea. Chinnery was the one who took him to the village, and Chinnery himself visited the village a few years before in 1926 for multiple administrative patrols. So Bateson's presence was mediated by the colonial government, and Bateson's research was understood by the colonial government as a way to understand and deal with what they called the Baning problem, concerned mainly with health conditions and population decline. To go further, I would draw your attention to the stairs on the left of the photo, so you can see them here. They are from another house next to Bateson, and thanks to a map drawn by Bateson himself in his field notes, it's possible to say that this house was made by Iatmul, the Tultul of Kainagunan. Bateson was close to this man and made several photos of him, and also a photo series of the construction of this particular house. So you've got a portrait of Iatmul on the left, the map drawn by Bateson, and then so the photo that you can see the stairs, in which you can see the stairs in the previous photo. Iatmul's house was created following colonial and coastal practices of having rectangular houses on stilts. And Iatmul at first created this house as an architectural challenge, and first attempted to create a house only sustained by one stilt, but he failed, and so that's why there's three on the photo. To continue my analysis, I will turn to the descriptions given by Bateson on the photos of Iatmul. In the museum record, he wrote, "Baning native from Tuyo River, Gazelle Peninsula. This is the man who built the house. He was a very intelligent Baning who had prolonged contact with Europeans. The government established him in Kainagunan as government interpreter, where he was profoundly hated by the local natives." And at the back of a print sent to Norabalo, he wrote, "Iatmul, Tultul of Kainagunan, my pet aversion, very intelligent." So Bateson's relationship with Iatmul was both affected by and affecting pre-existing local sets of relationships. So the Iatmul is said to be profoundly hated by local population, and the mention of pet aversion is also linked to his difficulties working in the community. Bateson went through a really difficult time while there. His research on the Baning culture was described by Bateson and later by other anthropologists as a total failure and a waste of time. Later in his career, Bateson expressed frustration over his stay, and when in the 1960s, for example, he met Jeremy Poole and his wife, he told them that during his fieldwork that was him often wandering alone in the forest because villagers would take off whenever they saw him. So Bateson's experience was not unique. Earlier and later ethnographies faced similar difficulties, and this failure impacted and still impacts the Baning group with damaging legacies. For example, there's several blogs written about them, and one of them considered them as the dullest culture on earth, where the Benin culture was deemed as unstudiable because of the lack of any culture or social organization. And it also became, in academia, a problem, which was called the Benin problem. So several people tried to explain Bateson's failure and why that happened. But through a close attention to Bateson's photos, it's possible to re-evaluate this failure. It's possible to do so by understanding the historical and relational context of this failure. Through the photo of Bateson's house, I showed how Bateson's positionality was materialized in the house, its architectural elements, but also in its position in the administrative hamlets. So the positionality of his research can therefore explain the ways in which Bateson was perceived and why Benin people would refuse to share everything with him. And so this refusal is at the center of this called failure and the reputation of the people as uncooperative. At the time of Bateson's ethnography, the Benin were mainly known for two facts. The first one is the massacre of missionaries in 1904. And the second one is the ceremonies and dances with masks for which little was known. So anthropologists and the colonial governors were really interested to know more about those ceremonies, and that's what they were also hoping for Bateson to go there and learn more about them. But Bateson wrote that he could never collect any general statement. The Benin are not an easy people to work among, and though they were keen enough to exhibit their dance and masks, they were very unwilling to talk about their religion. So the main issue was therefore to photograph and collect data to make sense of what he could observe. Bateson writes in his field notes how the Benin people would, for example, organize ceremonies in secret while he was away. So this failure relates first to the inability to get access to the ceremonies, but also raises the question of the relation between visibility and knowledge. And so that's why I'm showing you this picture. So this is the picture for which Bateson wrote in the catalogue. Unfortunately, she was embarrassed by the camera and bit on the end of the xylophone. Normally the wood is bitten in the center. So first we can guess that the photo that she was playing the xylophone just for the camera outside of the ceremonial context. And the second point is that the incorrect play of the instruments sort of brings awareness on the impact of the camera and the observer and raises questions. Did she play it incorrectly on purpose? Her action, intentional or not, marks the presence of the photographer and the viewer, and therefore kind of disrupt the whole project of Bateson's ethnography. So a critical perspective on the notion of failure shows that Bateson's failure was a direct result of Benin agencies in the process of photographic production. It's not only important to acknowledge the Benin agencies in the process of photographic production, but also to reevaluate the notion of failure itself. If it's the failure of anthropology, this failure is therefore it's also a direct result of the Baining, who are willingly making themselves opaque to ethnographic encounter. So after this so-called failure in the Baining regions, Bateson was quite depressed, spent some time in Rabaul, so in the capital of the territory, and there he met a friend there, and with him he went along the Sepik River and started recording genealogies and studying kittenship, and that's how he became interested in the Sepik region and decided to go back later on and started doing fieldwork there from June 1929. So he went three times to the region. So the first time between 1929 and 1930, then came back to England, and then went back a second time where he stayed mainly in Kanganamun, so between 1932 and 1933, and that's when he met Rio Fulton and Margaret Mead, and this famous episode of them in the Sepik River for Christmas. And then now married to Margaret Mead, they went back to Tambunum in 1938. So to talk about Bateson in the Iatmul region, I'm going to share this photo. So we still have Bateson's house, but this time it's in Kanganamun, so by the riverbank. So on the right you can see the Sepik River. So that was one of his houses in Kanganamun, because he had another one closer to the village, so inland. And here, so this house for work by the riverbank, and so you can see the mosquito nets and also different men standing in the house or by the house. Yes. So my interest in this photo is similar to the previous one in Kanagunan, because they bring a personal side of Bateson's work in the region, as opposed to the rest of the corpus, which mainly focuses on ceremonial life, performances, and this photo is part of a series of images made so at the same time, all by the riverbank, in which you have also several portraits of the men depicted in that same photo. So in the man, yeah, I think I should intro. So this man wearing, here standing, that's him, so that's Chinbat. So he's wearing the lap, which was so a piece of clothes that people who were working in plantation or with the colonial government would wear. So it was mainly the younger generation by the time Bateson was there. So Chinbat we know his name because this photo was published in Navin, and so Bateson gave his name. And Chinbat was perceived by Bateson as characteristic of this younger generation close to the colonial governments, but which was also challenging the elders and the traditional system. Another man that I could identify is the portrait of this man. So in the photo you can see him seated, he's there, and so you've got this portrait. So in the caption it says that that's a man from Timbunke, another village along the Sepik River. He's wearing ornaments indicating his mourning status. So you've got the this is all black ornaments around the arms, the neck. And so looking at Bateson's field notes, this man might be Tommy, who was an informant during Bateson's first stay in Mindinbit, so in 1929-1930. And this man is quite interesting because in January 1930 he told Bateson the story of a conflict between two villages about sago swamps, and Tommy gave his version of the story and told Bateson to record it and write it because he had to give it to his supervisors in England for them to know the truth about the story and their perspective. So through that story, it's important to note how local men would use Bateson and especially his notebooks as a way of recording their reality and their perspective, especially on recent fights. It also shows the connection and relation between the different trips that Bateson took. It's not because Bateson was first in Mindinbit and stayed in Iatmul the second time and then went to another village the third time, that there's still connections along the river, so people could move, so people from Mindinbit, even though that's where he was during the first time, and he was staying in another village, people could travel and visit him.